All right. So we're going to move rapidly on to our next panel session. We do recognize we're running a little bit behind, but we want to give the speakers their full time. So with that, we're going to bring on Beatrice, who is one of our co-organizers here at Keep Crash.
We went out and lobbied for more awesome talent.
So I'm going to bring on, let's see, Amber, Hannah, Lana, and Lisa. All right, I think you're all here, and with that, we're gonna change the layout, and then Lisa and I look at this amazing panel. I am so excited about it.
I'm taking a screenshot of this.
So everyone has
we should. This is going on LinkedIn before everything else gets recorded, right?
Everybody
before
smile.
We get to talk to everyone. There's just a few hundred people watching this, so all right. So with that, over to you, Beatrice.
Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Danielle. And thank you for all of those who are joining later in your day, or if it's afternoon for most of us in the North America, good afternoon as well. What a fantastic event. And as what Lisa and Danielle just mentioned as the great host that they are, this is a unique aspect because we're the opposite of a manel, which I was really excited to have, and really just a powerhouse crew of currently those who are building in the agentic space. So when I had an intro with everyone, I said, I don't even know how to intro. I think everyone's going to take their own and just introduce themselves. But I'll get started by saying this is a talk all around just, when I think of guardrails, I also think about like the guardians of agentic space. And I think this is a really good, compelling talk around how we're going to think about the patterns of platform teams using running AI or just even getting started. And here's some things that we can start thinking about. So before I introduce everyone, I'll just introduce myself shortly, and then the rest is just going to be hearing from these fantastic women. I'm Beatrice DeTangel-Rogers. I'm head of product marketing at Root. I'm usually based in San Francisco. I happen to be in New York this week just to hang out and be on a different time zone. So we're joined by some folks who are on the East Coast as well as in the United Kingdom and Ireland. So thank you again for joining. And then in terms of I wanted to do something different in terms of this intro. Instead of not just what I do, but also finish the sentence in terms of, since it's an agentic talk, my job is to make sure agents don't or do this. In this case, as a product marketer, I think of it in two cases. One is make sure that agents don't overwhelm you, and I help folks understand how to use agents in different ways, be it marketing, DevRel, community, tracking, etc. The other side is in terms of my current role at Root is to help you figure out that agents don't have to overwhelm you in terms of open source patching. Happy to chat more about that, but that's enough from me. I want to share the rest of the floor with my team and fellow panelists. I'm just going to go alphabetical here. So Amber, please go ahead, introduce yourself, 1 to 2 sentences of what you do, location, and finish the sentence. My job is to make sure agents don't or do blank.
Thanks, Beatrice. So yes, I'm Amber Benway. I'm based out of the Boston area. Currently, I'm leading DevRel at an AI company, but I'm also working on a new project in the AI supply chain space. So we're trying to create field guides and a trust layer so that everything that's used in the realm of AI follows a supply chain, has a score, can be inventoried, and ultimately security teams can answer questions on where exactly risk is when they see something in the news that's like, hey, this MCP is vulnerable. As a result of that, my job wouldn't really be a surprise, but my job is to make sure that the next log4j doesn't ship as a skill file.
All right, apologies, I was on mute. Hannah, go on ahead.
Hello, my name is Hannah Darley. I'm the co-founder and chief AI officer at Geordie AI. We are the agentic security and governance platform for the enterprise, really focused on helping businesses to safely adopt AI agents, but also to make sure that they're operating securely. My background is in government intelligence and in cybersecurity and AI. So I've done various roles across those two fields for about 15 years. And my job is to make sure that businesses actually get the return on investment from their agents by operating them safely.
Can't wait to hear more about that. All right, go on ahead, Leanna.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. So my name is Liana Ankatemescu. I am the CEO and co-founder of SunnyLabs.ai, which is all about security for AI agents in runtime. And I am based in Dublin in Ireland, though I'm originally from Romania, but been here for some time. My job at Sunny Labs is to make sure that AI agents don't get hacked and they stay secure and they don't get manipulated into deleting production database like we saw happen there the other day. So yeah, and so basically at Sunny Labs we look at this through our platform that actually came out of my research from University College Dublin here in Dublin back in 2023. So we use our own trained AI models to basically help organizations to make sure that as they're deploying AI agents, that it's all good and everything runs smoothly and that they can trust their systems. So lovely to be here. Thank you so much.
Awesome. And then let's close this out, Lisa.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me today. So I'm currently working on AI agentic orchestration and infrastructure in the open source space. And my background has been mostly in enabling software developers across a few different developer tools and security and cloud native startups. And my job is to make sure that agents are more safely accessible to more people.
I should have really started with, how many times can we say agent in this panel? And we'll do a poll about that. Just to get started, I'm publishing a poll right now all around who do you most align with or to in terms of their job or what they're working on, just so we can get a sense also. But needless to say, let's get started with what we're here to talk about. I want to set the scene by saying why now? Of course, we're here talking at a Cube Crash all around AI and platform engineering, but I also, coming from the security side of things, I'm also thinking about, I open up whatever social network now, and I'm seeing a ton of supply chain attacks. How does this, open up to the crew first? I think, Amber, you wanted to touch on this first since you kind of said it in your intro. How does your mental model kind of change from traditional software security? And then when it comes to AI, especially agents, I think everyone has an idea here, but let's just go around the horn and briefly talk about how have you changed your mindset around this?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk about this. So I've been doing DevOps for a really long time, DevSecOps, all of the acronyms. And, in some cases, I think of AI transformation very similar to how digital transformation happened. But the difference is one, the adoption model, a lot of it is coming top down. Teams are not talking to each other as peers. Or some teams that want to forge ahead and use all the cool stuff. There's other parts of the company and organizations that they want to be gatekeepers and try to put previous mental models around all the new stuff that's coming in the pipeline. So it's been very different. Where there is parallels, they're great. And there are things that work there. When there aren't, then it's you're completely throwing everything out the window in terms of what used to work for security and orchestration and infrastructure and all of the crazy things that go with enterprise AI at scale. So one of the things, I want to lead by saying is when it comes to supply chain risk, right? There's software supply chain and now there's AI supply chain. It's completely different. The distribution mechanism, or we're seeing components that go into AI applications and agents, they're coming from places that you would have never imagined. So when I talk about components, I mean skills and MCPs, agent configs. I myself, I'm finding them on X, in Notion pages, in Slack threads where people are having conversations, and they're great. I love seeing the innovation, but even myself, I find myself just pulling that stuff blindly into my environment sometimes, and I realize I'm pulling literally random untrusted code into, in some cases, very sensitive environments if I'm not paying attention. And so these things don't have things like provenance. They're not signed. Often they're not versioned. They're not coming from trusted registries, right? They come from things that we see that seem like they're trusted registries, but they're not. So, I feel like there needs to be an honest conversation about like what needs to change, but also like good habits that we need to carry on. But yeah, I'll stop there. Happy to give it to someone else if they want to comment.
Yeah, I would add just a piece on this that I think there's a really big component about when decisions are made that's really important about the AI supply chain versus the software supply chain. So for the most part, you spend a lot of time in your CI/CD pipelines, ideally in product development, working out exactly which choices are going to be made through that software package or through that application over its lifetime. And that's why things like pen testing make a lot of sense, because you're able to say, I know most of the decisions, if not all the decisions that are being made with this product. They're hard coded in, they're logic based, and I know exactly how it's going to work. Whereas where you're talking about the AI supply chain, all of those decisions are happening in real time. So not only do you have a lot more components, all of which were listed previously, but you also have a really different decision dynamic, and you have a lot less consistency in how that agent, how that piece of AI software, how that package is going to perform over time. So I think there's kind of a composite between like an ever widening ecosystem, but also the decision dynamics are really different.
Yeah, I can imagine not only the decision, but what context is meaningful or intentional to help you create that decision as well. Switching gears a little bit, we touched a little bit about that agent versus our traditional security to AI, and now it's more about the agent difference. Like let's move into like that threat modeling and reasoning, not necessarily the decision here. Like why has that reasoning and context and all of that really shifted? We used to be static. I say, coming from the security side of things, we try to be dynamic. We try to shift left, but it just hasn't necessarily gotten there. But now I think the game has changed a little bit. Over to you, Hannah, as we like, just because you're touching on it, what do you think, how has that like behavior changed on the technology side? And then we can like, share the mic after that.
Yeah, I think some of it is around the lines of actually the decision and how that disambiguates into the business. And so what I mean by that is all of those individual agents will reflect the user intention, but it's not the same relationship that you had even in LLM relationships, where you had a prompt and you had a response, and that response was really, really driven by the context in that prompt. But with agents, you have so many different points of interjection now. You have tools that have their own context. You have potentially multiple users that are affecting the same agent. And then you also have the agent affecting itself. So how it interprets the requests, how it carries context over time. And so I think a lot of it is still related to those decisions. But in terms of the threat model, it means because you don't have static variables, you don't have static components, you don't have consistency, you have non-determinism, which is everyone's favorite word when it comes to agents. But because of that factor, it means that you have to consistently evaluate possibilities that are potentially really random. You have a lot of anomalies when it comes to how agents are going to operate. Whether that's talking about something like a hallucination, or whether that's just talking about the potential ways that you can interpret the same request. So I always give the example of, if you sent an email to 6 colleagues, would they all answer it in the exact same way? No, they would answer it in completely different ways, and they could interpret the same request really differently. And so if you're imagining how that's changing, especially where you have some agents that are changing models mid-pathway or mid-work stream, you have a huge amount of interpretation that's happening. And then a lot of what we're talking about when it comes to the threat model is, how do I identify intent? How do I understand what's happening at each juncture of this workflow when there's not only a lot of moving pieces, but there's also changing actors? So I'm not just dealing with one specific actor or one specific medium over time.
Yeah, and speaking of like, how do we even keep track of that? I know we've done scoring in the past, prioritization. Sometimes that really changes when it comes to false negatives, false positives. Who wants to? I don't want to keep on picking on you, Hannah or Amber, but anyone who wants to talk more about like that scoring maturity. What is the score now? Because it's no longer static, as to what you were saying, Hannah, but also what do we do in terms of how do we create at least like version controlling? Is it through Git? How can we do it? So anyone who wants to talk more around just the scoring and the maturity model as things are progressing autonomously or not.
I'm happy to jump in
a little
bit. So yeah, scoring used to be static. Like you could scan one time or you scan after some type of action happens, like a code change, or like something changes like around that specific component, and you get a number and you move on. And like scoring isn't like 0 to 100. When you look at other like threat detection models and systems, sometimes it's severity, sometimes it's weighting, and so on. And I don't think that works anymore. And I've seen a lot of dialogue around this coming from companies that promise to remove vulnerabilities from everything, saying scanners don't work. Companies that use graph-based detection methods saying, oh, we need to look at like the neighbor and see what's going on there. But all that to say is like, I don't really care what the mechanism is. I think of it more as like a verdict that is looking, across the environment and looking at that continuously. So, it doesn't necessarily need to be like, hey, there's a vulnerability here and it pattern matches like this database. I think it's looking at a mix of different things, like the provenance, like where this thing came from, the permissions that are in there, intent. I think intent is a big one because IOCs, indicators of compromise, don't work in non-deterministic systems. And so like, that's the thing. For maturity, I talked to a lot of organizations, like especially in the Fortune 500s, that are starting to, it's scary, but they're starting to use agents at scale. They're starting to use do things with long-running AI systems and artifacts. And the way I look at maturity is like, at the very bottom, there's still a lot of organizations that don't have an inventory and they don't even know what's running. That's not even like saying, hey, this is unsafe or this has a vulnerability. Like they legit have no idea. Like I just talked to a team that, with the Vercel breach that just happened, when they started looking into it, they're like, oh my God, like a ton of people are using Vercel. Like that's not even an AI system. That's like an infrastructure system. So like we don't even have a grasp of that, let alone what's on it. As you work your way up, level 1, it's like, okay, cool, you have an inventory, but you might not have scanning. And then as you work up, it's scanning is there, but there's no gating. It's like, okay, cool, we know that there's bad stuff, but like there's so much signal, there's nothing we can do about it. And then, as you work your way up, you get to a good point where you have that gating, like the monitoring, the provenance, what came from where it went, and like the intent of what's running. And you can make good, honest, highly confident decisions based off of that. And so as I work with organizations, I'm like, very easily, I'm like, you can't be any level of mature if you don't know what's out there. You can't secure what you can't see. And I've been saying that for years. And that is the model that applies from like cloud transformation and the SaaSification of things into like the AI age. Like that principle is still there.
100%. And I think one thing on that's kind of back around the what's changed or what's different is your traditional security tools can't give you that visibility right now. So most of your existing security stack, if you don't have something that's purpose built for agents, it's not that it's completely blind to it, but it's that it lacks a lot of information, it lacks a lot of context. So you might be able to get, for example, a file inventory from your endpoint detection, or maybe from your app insights, or from some of how you're doing existing application security, but you won't know how it's being used. You won't know how that agent is actually operating. You won't know its configuration. And same with the runtime piece. To understand agents, you don't just need a log of WebSockets. You don't just need internet traffic. You need to understand how the agent is actually operating, that behavioral observability piece. And for a lot of teams, and I don't think it's just the Fortune 500, I think it's most teams, they don't have basic visibility across their agents, and they also don't have visibility across what those agents are doing in real time. So then when you're thinking about how do I build structure, how do I build governance, how do I secure it, it's exactly to the previous point. You can't measure what you can't see, and you can't secure what you can't measure. So all of that is really critical. But I think it's not just, a different type of security challenge that your existing tools are going to be able to cover. There's a lot around how agents operate that's really structurally different from how people operate on machines. And so you won't have the same choke points for that traffic. You won't have the same coverage. You won't have the same level of understanding across those pieces. So when it comes to how do I threat model, how do I actually get all of this in place, even if you just started with one platform, making sure that you have, for example, telemetry, you have activity logs, making sure that you have an identification system for where you're using those agents or how people are using them is really, really difficult to do without something that's purpose-built for agents.
Yeah, so just I would like to add on to that. I totally agree. So in the work that I've been doing building multi-agent systems, we ended up creating an immutable thread model. So we're basically using the same architecture as Sigstore's Recore, if you're familiar with that, but it's for agent behavior rather than artifact provenance. So we're thinking about a per agent transparency log. So every status change, every action, every handoff is being recorded in an append only entry. So we're still using that same mental model, but we're changing the scope a lot.
All right. It's always hard. I'm like, I just don't want to pivot because I think there's so much more here. But let's move in a little bit more around, I think it was Amber and a little bit of you, Hannah, when you were saying the who and what. And it's not only proving provenance, for instance, Amber, to your sake about, or to Lisa, your as well around transparency and provenance, but also what is doing the work and what does that look like? Lisa, over to you. Let's just talk more around what you're seeing in terms of the role of open source, really thinking about the who and what, so we can have that visibility and transparency more, either more about Recore or more around what you've seen in the other projects so far.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot to be done in the open source space. Like, I think things are moving really fast, and as we were talking about the different mental models, it's hard to keep up. It's hard for all of us to keep up, and things are changing so quickly. And I know a lot of people are talking about OpenClaw. A lot of there's also all these different kind of multi-agent things popping up, like Gastown, and there's just a lot to do for us in the security space to bring things forward from things like Sigstore that don't really exist in the agentic workflow. That's why, as my colleagues were saying here, that thinking about what do agents have access to, treating them like individual developers, like making sure that we're validating each thing that they're doing versus treating them as an individual artifact, I think is the big thing that is important here. But when we're bringing more people into the fold, I think we're just thinking about how do people who don't have this background in security who don't have a background in software even, how are we going to come across to them and make sure that they're doing things that are as safe as it possibly could be. I think one of the things that I've been working on has been around the MCP servers and how do we make sure those are as secure as possible. A lot of them are being used for documentation. And I mean, the other thing that's funny is those skills.md files, markdown files, are becoming nefarious actors just with injections, which is very funny to me as somebody who spends a lot of time in markdown, that it could become this evil actor. But MCP servers, a lot of them are being used for documentation. You think that documentation is harmless, but it actually is influencing so much on your machine. So if an AI assistant or agent that you're using is leveraging an MCP server that's literally just text, if something gets in there that shouldn't be in there, then it could start to do things that could be really bad to your machine, to anything that your machine might be connected to. And I think we as a community need to make sure that we're enforcing this in some capacity, that we're showing what the best practices are, that we're making sure people understand what's at stake and how, if people are not careful, it could hurt other people.
I would add on top of that, I think there's a really important piece around how agents reason that a lot of people just don't talk about, which is that it's spatial. So when you're talking about how do agents interpret context, how do they interpret requests, how do they take that documentation provided from skills from MCP servers, it's measuring the distance between words, right? You're looking at the relationship between king, queen, and monarch, and you're looking at that relationship and looking predictably at what's going to come next. You're not looking at what's the most accurate way that I can interpret this text, or what's the best way possible to stay truest to this instruction. You're looking at a lot of predictions. And so I think some of the misconceptions around why AI misbehaves or why agents aren't just completely predictable is because we're expecting human style reasoning that has complexities and layers when we're in the market for the most place dealing with a large language model. And there's a lot of additional model types that could come into the fore, which I'm really excited about for what that could lead to for agents. But I think if you're looking at it initially, one good thing to evaluate is it's always interpreting and it's always predicting. And so thinking about how do I structurally make it safe, you probably can't predict every single thing that could go wrong, but you have to find the safest way to keep it operating. So it's almost like managing critical systems, right? Like all of the possibilities of things going wrong, you can't potentially account for, but you can try to mitigate the majority of them that are most likely. And so really, I think one of the key challenges that a lot of people get to is kind of the overwhelm of all the things that could go wrong with agents before they operate them. And I think it's just about, as you were saying, putting the right systems in place from a best practice perspective so that you can operate them safely, but also expecting that you're going to have to pivot that and change it over time. It's not just going to be one guardrail or two guardrails that will fix everything.
All right, I'm super fascinated by this, and I want to turn it over to Leanna in terms of not only that gap, but also keeping track of it all, be it in observability or just identifying what that looks like, and between identity, security, reasoning, all that jazz. I would love to hear your thoughts here.
Yeah, so I think what's happening right now is that there's this new concept of agentic identity, where AI agents now have their own identities, and there's a few components that make it different now than how identity used to be for traditional software, and some of these basically is that, well, AI agents can do autonomous actions. So a traditional piece of software would do what it was coded to do, whereas an AI agent can go off and change things mid-session. It can go off and spin potentially other sub-agents and do things in different ways that weren't done before. So that's one factor that means that how AI agents have their identity, that changes as they need to access other systems and so on. And then another property as well that basically essentially breaks traditional identity is that AI agents can be manipulated using normal text. So that is specifically talking about the likes of prompt injection. So prompt injection, it's been a big topic. It was especially big for chatbots, but it's even bigger now for AI agents in the sense of indirect prompt injections, especially, which means that they're calling other files or it may be going off to the internet and accessing sensitive data or it's accessing sensitive data. And with all of this, those prompt injections, that bit of text gets basically lumped into everything else that the AI agent knows that the LLM is doing. And that can also be with that sensitive data as well. So now, again, that is changing how we're doing identity, where it's no longer just about the who and who it is. It's not just about authentication and authorization, but it's also about what is it actually doing? What is the actual point of it? So then basically as part of that, what we're seeing now is that when you're looking at agentic identity, you need to answer a few different questions. And this is, for example, the question of who are you? So who is the agent that is trying to do it? So that is, for example, like what is things like what is its name, maybe what is the AI model that it's using in the back end, and also what is it designed to do, and then also looking at who is it actually helping. So it's very important that as you're building these AI agents, that you have a user that's actually attached to, okay, so you've spun up this AI agent, but where did it originate? Eventually somewhere there was a human that made sure that this happened. So you want to have that connection there in place as well. You also want to look at, can the AI agent actually speak to other AI agents? And also within that as well. So other AI agents, but also what are the tools that this AI agent is able to do? So you really want to make sure that as you're doing all of this, you want to look at what are the jobs that the AI agent is actually trying to do as well. So the identity piece, again, it's no longer just about identity, again, the who and the what its authorization is, but it is about its purpose. And ideally, a good way to look at it is to try to apply the concept of least privilege to it, so that it's not going off and accessing absolutely everything that it can. And that's how, for example, OpenClaw, there were the risks around people using OpenClaw, that it can have access to everything on your computer. But instead, you want to apply least privilege to make sure that what are the bare minimum systems that the AI agent needs to do, and then essentially making sure that you start there and add on additional capabilities afterwards. Now, saying this, I know that this is very, very hard to do, because a lot of people want to be able to let the AI agent do autonomous actions, but from a security perspective, actually starting smaller is the more sensible way to do it. But there is a fine balance between letting innovation go forward and starting being too restrictive. So definitely agentic identity is very it's a fast moving space that as AI agents basically just keep changing how they're being built, you have to be very careful about what you're doing for the identities to make sure that they're not going off and doing all sorts of things they shouldn't. So yeah.
One thing I would add to that is just the agents are now orchestrating other agents, and I think we need to think about the agent to agent trust chains and not just the human to agent. I think this is something that's we're pretty early there, but something to keep in mind.
Yeah, there's also a lot of ephemeral agent usage. So Claude is really good at this, for example, where you'll have a team of agents that are spun up, but it's only for one session and then they'll go away. And it's too early to say, is that going to be the model going forward, or is that just an option? But I think the other thing is thinking about identity infrastructure is really complicated from a human workforce perspective. It's still not an entirely solved problem. So I think when it comes to agents, the magic word is accountability. Can I make sure that there is accountability for what this agent is doing? And can I also trace that back to either a human user or a group of users that are either operating this agent, building this agent, configuring this agent, have some relationship to the agent, rather than it all tying down to one individual form of identity? Because I think a lot of early approaches tried to standardize almost too soon on one specific authentication method or one specific credential type. And I think it's got to be more robust than that, because human identity is much more robust than that, and those operations are much more static.
Let's keep it with you then, Hannah. I know you're working on, in terms of just governance practices, or just to say it simply, like the guardrails to even think about this. Like, let's go into more details on, like, what do you think there, and that not only accountability, but what are the top 10 best practices that you could think of as we are touching on this more and more. We're talking about the different questions, how we can think about it, and also how we can arm ourselves to understand more.
Yeah, I won't give all top 10, don't worry. I'm sure that I can reference a blog where you can go read about those rather than me going through it. But I think one of the most important things to think about when it comes to governance, when it comes to thinking about security, is the difference between guardrails and responses or remediations. And I think it's hopefully not a hot take, but I feel like it's a hot take because it's not really talked about in the industry. But when we talk about guardrails, really what that should mean from a practice principle is a design element or limitation on how the agent is either set up, configured, or meant to operate on a consistent basis. That is a guardrail. Everything after that, so once you press go, once the agent starts operating, everything is a response or a remediation. It can't also be a guardrail, because the guardrail is supposed to keep you, from an operational perspective, from going off track. So if the agent goes off track, the guardrail either wasn't effective, it wasn't enough, or the agent found a way to operate around it. And so then you need responses. So I think one of the first things is you can't build 1,050,000 guardrails and expect that that will be the only thing that keeps you from outer darkness when it comes to agents. You have to also have responses. You have to have real-time controls that help you as the agent is operating, so that you're not just dependent on best practices. You're not just dependent on the design system and the agent having the right systems in place, or having the right instructions, or having the right limitations around rate or trajectory that will stop it from doing anything unexpected. Because a lot of those are designed around operating in an optimum way. They're not always designed around operating in the way that your goal is getting fulfilled, or in the way that the agent is going to change over time. So really thinking about, number one, design guardrails are an important point, but they're not the only mechanism that you have to control agent behavior. They're an important aspect of your governance program. I think the second thing is thinking about, number two, where you want to align to frameworks, and building your own best practice framework. For the majority of businesses that we work with, there's not just one framework that they're aligning to. So of course, we always talk about the EU AI Act, or we talk about international standards like ISO 42001 for AI systems, or best practices like OWASP or NIST, and all of those are really helpful. But I think to have a really effective AI governance program, you're combining multiple frameworks. You're not just aligning to one. You're really thinking about, how am I going to use these AI systems, and how do I govern them in practice? And it's one of the reasons that the term AI security drives me nuts, because there are so many different applications of AI, and you govern none of them the same way. So the way that you govern unsupervised machine learning algorithms is completely different to how you need to worry about LLMs. So thinking that through, how do we have something that's specific and contextual, to use that magic term, for our business, and then also making it a living document? It can't just be a policy that you set and forget. It needs to be something that you continuously look at. And so when we talk about threat modeling, when we talk about risk analysis, it's really a living analysis in real time of how agents are operating and what we've accepted as a risk perspective, so that you have both of those components, rather than just, are we in line with this framework at this one point in time? Because so much can change with agents. You have a really quick way to change tools, and then you potentially change the entire shape of how an agent's going to operate. And so therefore you would change the level of threat or level of risk that it poses to the business. So how do I keep on top of that? It's continuous analysis and continuous governance. You're not just going to have one static policy, you're going to have a lot of them. And the last piece that I would say is around having an understanding across the business of different goals. So AI agents from a security perspective or from a developer perspective are going to have very different measures of success than from the business operations side of things, and from all of the teams across the business that are adopting various kinds of agents at the same time. So really thinking through, how do we get the most out of this data? Because it's such good dual use data. There's real value for security and engineering teams, but there's also a lot of value for how AI is being used across the business from an operations perspective. So hopefully all of this data can be shared a lot more than it has been in the past with security data, in terms of keeping everybody on best practices and governing their agents well.
All right, I think we can all speak on this for much longer. I know it's a jam-packed agenda, and they might be running a little late. So I'm gonna try to do my best to close this out with a fun, actionable closeout. And I see there's one question in the chat. I'll try to slide it in shortly, but I want to. So as we, by the way, if anyone hasn't seen the links, I'm dropping a ton of links in terms of what our panelists are talking about, just to get more context as well. But as we close out, I'm going to take a pivot around, instead of just AI agents all the time. How are we all keeping up? I think previous talks have also done, like, here's a good takeaway. Here are the links that I'm sharing, either my GitHub repo, et cetera. But I like, Amber, you brought it up of, like, how is everyone keeping up? Is an agent following other agents and watching the news? Would love to hear some more about that as we close out, and hopefully give the audience some other ideas of how do you stay up to date? Because it's not just staying up to date, it's also testing it out. And to Michael, your point is, who's actually watching it too? So take it away, anyone who wants to get started, just like a flash lightning minute or less in terms of answering.
I can give 2 tips. So Notebook LM is pretty sick. There was a conference that happened recently. I think it was like Unprompted Con, and they put all of the talks in a notebook. And I like found out so much stuff that I wish I did. I'm like, what have I been reading that I don't know about all of this? So I've been using that a lot for like information management. Sometimes I'll see something interesting, I put in a note, and then like at the end of the week when I have time to like go learn about something, I throw it in Notebook LM and get a good summary. This one I just found out about this past week, but I think we are very US centric in like the news that we get. I learned from another engineering leader that she's been using RedNote, which is like a Chinese social media platform, and they do a good job kind of aggregating news from like tech feed sources and other areas and catering to you based off of what you're interested in. So yeah, I went ahead and I downloaded RedNote. I didn't give it a bunch of information, but it's been showing me cool things like projects in Asia that are blowing up. Like the news cycle there is like very different than what we have here. So it gives you a perspective of what's out in the world, the hottest new Chinese model, which has been very interesting.
Yeah, I have a news gathering agent that keeps me up to date. It summarizes everything, and then I have an accuracy checker that provides links. And then the third agent essentially gives me the TLDR of what I need to read and if I want to read more. So that's the only way that I can keep up, because there's so much happening across the board. And Beatrice, I think you said this on the prep call. Ideally, we're not only getting our news from LinkedIn, so trying to find other news sources as well.
Yeah, and for myself as well, there's a lot of very cool blogs that are out there. So I quite like Simon Willison's blog. So he actually talks about things like the lethal trifecta and so on. So there's a number of best practices as well that can be followed. And we actually made a white paper about this as well. And basically, so I also follow a lot of email newsletters. So I've actually been putting together the things that we're finding into our email newsletters. So yeah. So if anyone wants to sign up to that and see that white paper as well. But also just generally I suppose it's less directly interesting, but just looking at some of the research papers, because there's a lot of very cool research that's coming out now. Though, yes, you probably, to make it more interesting, you probably want to use Notebook LM for them. But yes, thank you.
Yeah, I'll just, I'm learning a lot by listening to everybody else. I've been doing a lot more things in person, so in-person community stuff. I think there's a lot, like, listening to talks is great, but the hallway track is really useful. Like, and it's a way to, I feel like there's the signal to noise ratio is a lot easier to differentiate that a bit in person. I think just being part of the community, whatever that community is for you, is just a good place to share thoughts. And that's why things like Cube Crash are great too.
All right. Well, that I think we're good on time. Lisa, you tell me.
Yes.
There you are, just magically appearing.
We're here.
We got a lot going on from a technology standpoint, so sometimes it's,
you got it.
We got to follow our breadcrumbs back through the woods, and everybody's leaving. But thank you so much, and apologies to Amber. I didn't realize Amber had a hard stop, but thank you for all the time that you were able to give us. Sorry, we were running a little bit behind, but that was fantastic. Such good information from such incredible experts. Thank you so much,
and thank you for being a co-organizer of Cube Crash.
Yay!
Anything and everything. Enjoy, and thanks for joining, everyone. Take care.
Thanks.